Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this Horizon Series webinar. LRIC initiated this series of webinars as part of our mission to help create a better future for the livestock value chain. Innovation is all about incremental improvement, and we believe that the topics covered in this webinar series are having and will have direct impact on the future of Ontario's livestock sector. Each webinar is complemented with a white paper, co-authored by myself and Chloe Neudorf, with invaluable input from a well-known and respected expert in the topic area. During the presentation, please send your questions along using the Q&A function, and at the end, Jean Howden will bring these forward for discussion following the presentation. And now I'll ask Chloe to introduce today's speaker. Enjoy the session.
Thank you, Mike. Today, we are pleased to welcome Dr. Rene Van Acker, Professor of Plant Agriculture and Dean of the Ontario Agriculture College at the University of Guelph. Dr. Van Acker is the contributing editor to the first white paper and is here to speak on that topic, regenerative agriculture. He has experience on topics such as weed biology and ecology, robust cropping systems, and multifunctional agriculture. With over 130 peer-reviewed and over 300 non-peer-reviewed works to date, and his continued involvement teaching plant agriculture at the Ontario Agriculture College, Rene is LRIC's regenerative agriculture expert.
Well, thank you very much, Chloe and Mike. I really appreciate this opportunity, and I'd like to thank LRIC for your leadership, and I'd like to thank you, Mike and Chloe, for writing this white paper. It's great to have this sort of foresight and to look out over the horizon to try to plan for the future. So again, I hope everybody can see those slides, and I have a large number of slides, but there's a lot of movement in the presentation today, so a lot of it is just transition and some of it's just pictures, but I really appreciate this opportunity, and the topic is I think a great one, and one that we're hearing a lot about. So first of all, what is regenerative agriculture? And again, I have to thank Chloe and Mike for the great job they did in the definition that they put together for the paper. I think it really hits the mark in terms of what regenerative agriculture is. And there's some key things in that I've highlighted in the definition. So set of farming and grazing practices benefit health of agricultural land ecosystems by revitalizing soil health. So there's a focus of soil health in the regenerative agriculture initiative, a focus on organic matter, and really I would say organic matter and carbon. So there is a consideration of carbon and the carbon cycle, which in turn generates a domino effect of positive health and environmental effects. You know, we might have called regenerative agriculture sustainable agriculture a decade ago. It is not necessarily something new, but it is a renewal of a movement around sustainability in agriculture. The newness is the emphasis of soil health and being clear about having carbon in the conversation in relation to climate change, carbon cycles, and the interest in using carbon out of the atmosphere. And it is popular. So this is an article from a week or so ago, Toronto Star. I was very shocked, opened the Toronto Star on a weekend and and see an article about winter wheat and sustainable farming. I thought I was reading the Ontario Farmer, but no, this is a Toronto Star for a very urban audience. So it is something that people are interested in. And I think that, if nothing else, is something for us to take note of. And it's one of the reasons why it's important for us to take note of regenerative agriculture and to be on the leading edge of thinking about what regenerative agriculture is, what it means, and what we are doing in this regard. So why does it matter? It matters because it's popular, and it's popular beyond the farming and agriculture communities. It's also important because of this kind of data. This is data from a research group at the University of Waterloo, put out a number of years ago. But it shows the carbon equivalents per gram of product for a range of food products, farmed food products. And you can see that some are further along on that continuum and some not so much. There might be some surprises here for you in terms of where some of these things appear. We notice that beef is out on the far edge. This kind of data increasingly matters to policymakers and increasingly matters to the general public, especially newer generations where they're interested in the carbon footprint of the things they are eating. It also matters because soil health matters, and I know we all in our agricultural community knew that 2015 was the year of soils. But increasingly, there is a popular interest in soils and soil health, and it is in turn rejuvenating movements that farmers have always had around an ethic for caring for the land stewardship, and soil health, but now being very explicit about soil health and increasingly creating that connection between healthy soils and healthy people. And that draws in the popular interest in healthy soils. And regenerative agriculture has at its core improving the health of soils. This is data from OMAFRA, and we know that different kinds of farming systems have different effects on soil organic matter. And soil organic matter is a key contributor to healthy soils, and it's a key metric for healthy soils. Soil organic matter is also an indicator of captured carbon in the soil, so it's part of that carbon cycle. And we can see, for example, in this graph that cropping systems with forages were found to have 1% more organic matter on average across the province. So this is important because there are only some farming systems that can really benefit from the use of forages or have forages as part of their business model because they are livestock farms that use forages. This is data from a friend of mine, Martin Entz at the University of Manitoba, a long-term trial that he runs at Glenlee, south of Winnipeg. And I think this kind of data is increasingly important where we look at metrics in farming systems like energy use and carbon emissions. This is a plot which is currently in flax. There's fertilizer and pesticide applied, and it's an annual crop rotation, wheat, pea, wheat, flax. So it uses that much energy, and the carbon emission is that much. We can look at another plot in this same experiment, and there's no fertilizer, no pesticide applied. We see that the energy use is about a quarter, the carbon emissions is about a quarter. And this is a plot where there's what we might call a mildly diversified rotation. So there's 2 years of alfalfa, so short-term perennial put into that rotation. And that's a deep-rooted perennial that sequesters carbon permanently. It's also a deep-rooted perennial that's a legume and fixes nitrogen out of the atmosphere, and so puts nitrogen into that cropping system and adds nitrogen freely with sunlight energy as opposed to nitrogen brought in using natural gas through the Haber-Bosch process to produce synthetic nitrogen that we apply to the field. And I think the popularity of regenerative agriculture reminds us of some basic things that we learned, in fact, in grade 6 or 7, and that was how photosynthesis works. But maybe, maybe we've forgotten that, or maybe we need a reminder of how wonderful farming and agriculture is and how special it is. Farming is an exercise that's practiced at scale that captures free sunlight energy through plants, and then those plants act as a water pump to then capture carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and convert carbon into things that are useful, like food or feed for animals, which in turn is then food. It really is remarkable. And it runs on free sunlight energy, like I said, and it captures lots of carbon at scale out of the atmosphere and turns it into things that are useful to people. But I'm not sure the farming and agriculture community has sufficiently capitalized on the wonder of what it is that we do. And this is a good example. This is just this past Saturday's star. And Elon Musk, who is an amazing self-promoter, is now promoting capturing carbon out of the atmosphere and inventions to capture carbon out of the atmosphere and turn those things into useful consumer products. He is a proponent behind things like the X Prize. So you can go on to COSIA, the Canada's Oilseed Innovation Alliance, Canada's Oil Sands, sorry, my agriculture brain, Canada's Oil Sands Innovation Alliance. And they have supported this X Prize for inventors who invent things that capture carbon in the atmosphere, out of the atmosphere, and turn it into things that are useful to people. I know you're all shaking your heads and going, but that's what we do in farming, and that is what we do in farming. Surprisingly, when you go further into this website and they give you some examples of things you might turn carbon into, these are the examples. Vodka, hand sanitizer, sunglasses, purses, wallets, phone sleeves, laptop sleeves, straws, cutlery. I find this mind-boggling, but I'm an insider, you know, and what it tells me is that we haven't done a great job of really making plain to the world the value proposition we bring through photosynthesis to capture carbon out of the atmosphere and turn it into things that are useful, like, for example, food. There's no food on that list. And yet that's what we do through agriculture. So it's funny that vodka is first on that list. But it also is a window in to the culture that they're playing to. And that is the core of popular culture that they are playing to. So I think there are lessons for us here. And then when we go to the agriculture community, the agriculture and food community, the industrial agriculture and food community, they are fully getting on board with regenerative agriculture and its championing of soil health and capture of carbon out of the atmosphere, because they want to promote to the core of that popular culture, especially on the food side, because those are their customers. So that's why regenerative agriculture is important in terms of market forces and external forces. But it's also important inside the farm gate and in terms of our own farming operations. This is a table from the paper, and it lists many of those benefits of regenerative agriculture within the farming system and at the farm level, and to things, for example, like soil health, reduction in pest attack, increased resilience, etc. Now, Mike asked that I speak to maybe some of the research that's going on that's relevant to regenerative agriculture. And I'd like to start by saying that, again, this is not necessarily something new. Doing a good job of sustaining the land is something that farmers have always done and have always prioritized. And that has evolved and modernized over the years. But we have farmers always returning to this ethic and starting and restarting movements to make sure that they take care of their land and their animals, and that they produce very high quality products for customers. This is a figure from Weaver 1919, over 100 years ago, looking at deep-rooted species for sequestering soil carbon, or carbon in the soil. And so this is nothing new. And then we see people who've been sort of on the cutting edge. So Joel Salatin and his family in Virginia, Polyface Farm, looking at very diversified, very cutting edge kinds of complicated farming systems that are maybe not the example for everybody, but are something to look at to say, well, what's possible if we really push the envelope on this? And Salatin on his farm achieves an energy efficiency of sort of 20 to 40 times. So energy unit in, energy units out in terms of products, which is incredible. So these are things that we can look to as far on the horizon and things to learn from. This is data from Martin Enns that shows us that energy consumption varies tremendously among farming systems. And he also reminds us that fertilizer energy is primary in determining the energy consumption of farming systems in terms of carbon out. And legumes and biologically fixed nitrogen can be a big part of saving on energy in those farming systems. He also reminds us that energy efficiency really depends a lot on not only the farming system, but the outputs and where they go. So if they go through animals, the feed conversion efficiency of those animals matters a lot in terms of the overall carbon and energy picture of that farming system. In terms of the University of Guelph, we have a whole range of faculty, and I just listed some. This is not a complete list by any stretch, but these are people that I know many of you would know who are very active in sustainable farming, looking at farming systems, looking at carbon in farming systems, looking at regenerative agriculture. And of course, through these folks, their network of networks. And the funding partners. The producer groups, including LRIC, have been at the forefront of pushing for research and innovation support and pushing the boundaries around what's happening in research. The Ontario Agri-Food Innovation Alliance, the OMAFRA agreement with us at the University of Guelph, is exceedingly important in driving these things. The Fed-Prov programs, which again, the producer groups drive, are so important for funding, and then NSERC, Federal Tri-Council funding. And we really appreciate the research station network that we have through ARIO, the Agricultural Research Institute of Ontario, and the Ontario Agri-Food Innovation Alliance, the OMAFRA agreement, which provides us really an unprecedented platform for research across Ontario that allows us to do research at scale. That's really important to allow us to do things in the field at commercial scale across all the agro-eco regions in the province. And we have some researchers that we look to regularly. I mean, I would use as an example Claudia Wagner-Riddle. This is just a screenshot capture from her lab's homepage. Claudia has done some really exceptional work, leadership work, working closely with the dairy industry around their own carbon efficiency and their ability to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions in Ontario dairy farms. Claudia was also the lead behind an NSERC CREATE program around climate smart soils, which is, as it says there, multi-institutional soil center program to address the need for highly qualified people who can help to push the boundaries on sustainability or regenerative agriculture in Canada. I know many of you know Kim Schneider, and Kim was kind enough to lend me some of her slides from, I thought, an exceptional presentation she made earlier this year at the Beef Symposium. And Kim has quickly got on board with a tight group of people at the University of Guelph and extending beyond, including Ira Mandel, Katie Wood, Carrie Dunfield, and their key technicians. And I think their title here on their project, Management, Strategies and Carbon Sequestration, Soil Health, Forage Productivity, and Animal Performance, says it all. These are projects where they're trying to achieve all the key measurements in regenerative agriculture and all the key measurements for successful farming, remembering that farming is always a bioeconomic activity. Farming exists in the private sector, and farmers have to be economically successful at the same time that they are stewards for their own land, their own animals, and that they can be part of climate solutions around capturing carbon. This is another project that they've been working on, grazing management, carbon sequestration, soil organic matter. Remember the data I was showing you earlier, and soil quality in Ontario. Again, working with James Longstaff and Paul Veroni, Ira Mandel again, and in this case, Edward Bork from University of Alberta. And then another project that Kim and Katie are working on together, requirements for increasing pasture utilization and development of benchmark targets for ruminant production. So setting the stage for understanding where we've come from and where we're going. Liz Lee, Nigel Rain are a couple of leaders in terms of Nigel's our pollinator chair, and looking at how these systems affect knock-on values in the environment. So there's some interesting intercropping work that they've been doing, and then more practical things like red clover establishment in winter wheat. So these things are, again, not new. These are very fundamental things, but they go to the principles of regenerative agriculture, and we have a great cadre of people that are able to work on these things outside on the landscape where farming mostly happens. So what are the next steps? Part of it is what we're doing right now, which is to learn about regenerative agriculture, to understand it, and then to figure out where we are in this movement. And this is a representation of the various elements in regenerative agriculture, but things that I think we understand already. So maybe this is a reminder of some of the basic tenets of sustainable agriculture: minimize soil disturbance, maximize crop diversity, keeping the soil covered, maintain living roots year round, and integrating livestock into those systems so that there's a cycling of nutrients, which builds in turn healthy soil. The first step of regenerative agriculture is refocusing on that land use for raising livestock, where often soil health is not considered as a measure of success on the farm. So these are quotes I'm taking from the paper. And so another first step is really to be deliberatively thinking about soil health as a primary goal for the farm, and knowing ways to measure soil health. The other thing that's really important in terms of steps is to consider what you want to do. When I was working with Chloe and Mike on the paper, I asked that we include a small section on cultural change. And I did that because we had learned in research we had done over the years that at the end of the day, the most important factor in something happening is people choosing for it to happen. And then the other thing is patience. Some of these initiatives take a while before they start to before you start to reap benefits. And so changing a farming system, regenerative agriculture doesn't come in a jug, it doesn't come in a bag. It's about changing the system and evolving the system. So patience is important. And if we want to know more, there's a number of places we can go to. First of all, I would recommend the LRIC website. So this is first white paper, but many more to come. And again, I really applaud Mike in his leadership and Chloe in her research and writing. OMAFRA has had a soil health strategy that they've had out for a while, and it's a great source of information, including best management practices. There's a website there. Everything old is new again, and the Ontario Soil Crop Improvement Association has been around for a long time proponents of soil health, and they've stayed the course, and they are always relevant, and they are relevant again. At Guelph, we've initiated something called Soils at Guelph, which is a repository of information around soil health, best management practices, current research, and a brokerage to researchers and expertise on this topic, led by 3 faculty: Laura Van Acker, Carrie Dunfield, and Claudia Wagner-Riddle, and then the coordinator is Cam Ogilvie. And there's also an Ontario Soil Network that you can go to for connections and information, and it's a community of farmers really who are doing things differently around sustainable agriculture, improving soil health, and regenerative agriculture. And lastly, I want to do a pitch for a talk that's our class of OIC 59 through their Future Thinkers Fund and my dean's office is supporting at the Midwest Cover Crop Conference, where Roger Martin, past head of the Rotman School of Business at the University of Toronto, is speaking on efficiency and resiliency in agriculture, February 24th, 7 to 9 p.m. It's free. You can sign up virtually for that. So with that, thank you, and open for questions.
Thanks, Rene, for your presentation. I'm Jean Howden with the Livestock Research Innovation Corporation. So I'm going to kind of moderate the questions with Mike and Rene, although I think most of them are probably going to you, Rene. So I want to get to as many questions before 12:40 as I can. So we'll start with the first one we've got. Oh, and I do want to make one note that the webinar is being recorded and it will be available early next week. So going to our first question, did the work that you referenced regarding CO2 equivalents generated by production type, with beef was at the far right of that, take the carbon cycle with methane into account?
Yeah, that work would have would have taken that into account. The life cycle analysis is complex and complicated and has a lot of different elements in it. What I would say is those were, my understanding of that work is that those were measures based on sort of a median in production systems. And what we do know is that depending on the production system, those carbon equivalents can rise or fall. And so if you had a production system with beef, for example, that was primarily grass-fed, pasture-based, you'd have an awful lot more offset for those carbon equivalents for those animals.
Thanks. What's the difference between regenerative agriculture, ecological agriculture, and conservation farming?
Yeah, that's a good question. You know, I think these are all examples of movements, and although having said that, I think regenerative agriculture as a movement is one that, as I emphasized at the beginning of the talk, is trying to emphasize two key things, one being soil health and the other one being relevance to the carbon cycle. And so there's a relevance to the conversation around climate change in the regenerative agriculture community, it seems to me. Conservation agriculture is another term that was popular in the late 90s, early 2000s. Ecological farming is a term where there's a community built, you know, there's Ecological Farmers of Ontario, for example. There's a community around that. You know, in Manitoba, there's a community built around natural systems agriculture, which is another term for, you know, increasingly diversified, integrated farming systems that end up capturing more carbon, building soil health. But they all have those principles of integration and diversity, and they all are looking at building up the farming system as opposed to it degenerating, and that especially is true in terms of soil. So it's, I mean, I think there are many names for, in many ways, the same thing.
So we've got a number of questions just related to how to get people involved and do we need incentives to do so. Here's one that seems to accumulate it. It's like, do you foresee an industry accepted minimum baseline or definition being developed that would qualify a farm as sustainable or regenerative? Some farmers would look at a list of regenerative ag practices on that side and consider themselves sustainable, while others implementing one practice, no-till soys into corn with minimal crop rotation, no livestock.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. What I would say is that I think something we need to focus on is trajectory. And trajectory in terms of soil health is something we need to watch closely, because at the end of the day, soil is the basis of it all. I mean, we have no broad scale agriculture if we don't have soil. So on key soil health metrics like soil organic carbon or soil organic matter levels, if that trajectory is going up as opposed to going down, that's a good measure. And so I don't think we should be landing on, if you have soil organic matter levels of 4% or higher, you are a sustainable farm. I think it should be about trajectories, and we should be for sure worried for farming systems where the soil health trajectories are down. That's how I would approach it. I'd be a little bit wary of absolute categories, because as we know, conventional versus organic, for example. I mean, we can have conventional farms that have good trajectories. We can have organic farms that have bad trajectories. So those labels are not an assurance necessarily. Most of them are process labels. So long as you follow the formula, you get the label.
Okay. The research gaps section of the white paper was a bit light. Does this mean that no research is needed and it's just a matter of adoption?
That's also a very good question. And it's going to sound strange coming from me, but I would say the short answer to that is yes. And now I'm going to have a whole bunch of my faculty beating me over the head. The reason I say that is because I think a lot of the fundamental things we do know how to do and have known for a long time. We understand that if we, monoculture soybean on a conventional tillage platform, we're going to lose that soil. We're going to beat the heck out of that soil, and we're going to lose soil organic matter, and that soil is going to degenerate. I don't think we need any more research to tell us anything about that, other than to don't do it. So I think you're right. I think the action is key. There's always going to be things we need to know, and there's always going to be need for research to help us to move further in areas. But in terms of getting started now and doing something now, I think we know enough to do something now.
That leads right into another question as to what resources are available to support farmers in adapting regenerative practices.
Yeah, I think I think there are always programs. If we work through OSCIA, for example, there are some programs that can help to support best management practices. I think it's a good question. If we look at OMAFRA's soil health strategy, I think people are still waiting for some of the programs that might be available through that, which would support farmers directly for adopting best management practices. But at the end of the day, as I said, the successful examples are examples where farmers have done this of their own accord, have chosen to do it, and have been patient, and in the end reap the benefits that come with improved soil health. And those include economic benefits.
All right. Here, I don't know, Mike, you might want to take, what role does production insurance have in encouraging practices within the regenerative ag principles?
Yeah, that's also a very good question. I know years ago, we were doing some work in Western Canada looking at anonymized crop insurance data. And we were able to show that there was a link between claims and crop rotation diversity. So fewer claims with greater crop rotation diversity. And so there is a link between the resilience of a farming system and its adoption of regenerative practices, and less need then for insurance and business risk management programs. So there are linkages there, and I think a case could be made nationally and provincially for in the long term investing in farmers adopting those practices, which in turn would lead to savings in BRM.
Gene, maybe
That'd be a great research project.
Gene will jump in there, having some experience with business risk management programs. there's always the thought of introducing cross compliance with programs, which on a first level makes an awful lot of logical sense. It does get fairly complex once you start to look at that. I think the key thing, though, there are probably some opportunities as far as linking these things to production insurance. But as Rene said, if studies show that you're more sustainable and more profitable, that's going to be the key. Because a movement, like Rene said, most of agriculture is run as a business, not just on kind of an outlook. It's nice when those combine, but at the end of the day, it has to be linkage to profitability. So I could see some sort of cross linkage or incentives through production insurance in the future, and it's something that has been thought of in the past.
2 or 3 key points that everybody on the webinar you hope they remember. Rene, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I'll go first. I think a couple of key things. One is, well, two key things that I think I emphasized in the definition of regenerative agriculture is how soil health is core to that, and also how there's an implication of carbon and the carbon cycle and relationship to climate change. And I think those two things are really important because they speak to how this movement is popular. And by popular, I mean not only in farming communities, but this movement is now popular in broader society, and that has implications for farmers. So I hope there's that takeaway.
My main one would be that, like most important things in life, it's not simple. Regenerative agriculture, as much as we do know it, it is a complex kind of big picture look at things. And too often livestock is getting painted with a bad paintbrush on a number of fronts, when in fact it is, as Rene has shown, a key element of regenerative agriculture. And I think that's a really important point that the livestock sector needs to focus on.
And final question, Rene, what's on the horizon for regenerative agriculture?
I think we're going to see it continue to grow as a movement, and I think we're going to see farmers and farm organizations grab hold of regenerative agriculture and lead it. I think that's going to happen because it is another opportunities for farmers and farm organizations to lead.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Rene. I want to thank you for your presentation today and assisting us in this endeavor. I want to thank Chloe for doing a whole lot of behind the scenes work and a good job writing the paper. We need to thank Charlotte Wall, who is behind the scenes here that nobody has seen, doing our IT with us. If you're interested, you're welcome. Please go to our website, sign up for our newsletter, follow us on Twitter. Our next webinar will be on greenhouse gases, and it will be presented by Dr. Claudia Wagner-Riddell, and it'll be held on March 16th. So watch for that. And again, thanks everyone for joining us today. The recording will come out next week, early in the week. Thank you.
Thank you, Jean. Thanks, everyone.